and dwelt in homes free, where nor love nor woman goes and comes. In other words, why do we have to be cursed as men to live with women? How is it, or how is that daughter not a bane confessed, whom her own sire sends forth? He knows her best. And will some man but take her, pays a dower. In other words, the only way you can get a man to ever consent to marrying a woman is because there's got to be some money exchanged in a dowry and that kind of thing. And he, poor fool, takes home the poison flower, last to hang jewels on the deadly thing he joys in. We remember Hamlet's comment to Ophelia in the play Hamlet. Shakespeare probably thinking about this set of lines. Wise men know well enough what fools you make of us and all of that, right? Labors for her robe wearing till wealth and peace are dead. In other words, he says anytime a man takes a woman home, he ends up losing all of his money and all of his sanity because he's trying to take care of her. He smarts the less in whose high seat is set, a nothingness, a woman not availing. Worst of all, the wise, deep-thoughted. Never in my hall may she sit throned, who thinks and waits and sighs, I will not be interested in girls. For Aphrodite breeds most evil in the wise, and least in her whose heart has naught within. For puny wit can work but puny sin. Why do we let their handmaids pass the gate? Wild beasts were best, voiceless and fanged, to wait upon their rooms, that they might speak with none, nor ever hear one answering human tone. In other words, why do we allow these women to have their handmaids, nurses, who do these little things like go-betweens and all of that kind of thing? But now, dark woman is still in still chambers lay plans that creep out in the light of day on handmaid's lips. And then he turns to the nurse. As thine accursed head braved the high honor of my father's bed, and came to traffic, our white torrent's spray shall drench mine ears to wash those words away. It's interesting that he would use the word picture of a wave, because at the end of this play, it will in fact be a wave that will frighten his horses and ultimately will kill Hippolytus. And couldst thou dream that I feel impure still at the very hearing. He says, I can't even say the words out loud, that the suggestion was that I would sleep with my father's wife. By the way, we do think, don't we, of Joseph in the story from Genesis 39, don't we, of Potiphar's wife and the way that she tries to seduce Joseph and he runs away, and for that he gets jacked in jail and in prison and all of that. No, for sure, woman not but mine honor saves ye both. By the way, Phaedra is there on stage when all this is being said, but he doesn't even recognize her. He doesn't even see her. She's sitting over there kind of cowering the whole way, right? Then he says, shall I have the taste of it and know what woman's guile is? Woe upon me, woe! How can I too much hate you, while the ill you work upon the world grows deadlier still? Too much? Make woman pure and wild love tame, or let me cry forever on their shame. And then he leaves, leaving Phaedra to say, sad, sad and ill-starred is woman's state, no doubt. From this point on, the play is actually ostensibly over. It ends really quickly from here on out. Phaedra will go off stage telling the nurse, who says, don't worry, I've got another plan. She says, I don't want to hear any more from you. And she runs off stage and she hangs herself. Very much, of course, we're thinking about Jacusta at this point, don't we, right? Then Theseus comes home. He's been on a journey. And he comes home to find, first of all, his wife dead. Second of all, his wife with a note in her hand, written on a tablet. And the note says that she had to kill herself, Phaedra, because Hippolytus raped her, ruined her honor. And of course, this leaves Theseus with a major problem. Not only is his wife dead, but his son has been accused of raping his wife. And in a moment, in a fit of rage, he will exile his son, and he will call down Poseidon, asking Poseidon to kill his son. Obviously, Hippolytus begs to be heard. He says, there's absolutely no way that I would ever have done this, right? And then ultimately he leaves. Hippolytus is out on the road. His chariot, he's a great rider of his ponies with his chariot. From out of the sea comes this huge sea bull and a wave frightens the horses. The ponies run off over the rocks and drag Hippolytus pretty much to his death, nearly to his death. And at the very end of the play, we have Aphrodite, who's finally ready to show up and actually say something. Of course, you could ask the question, really? Where were you when Hippolytus was being accused by the note that was left in Phaedra's hand? And yet, Artemis will come to speak right directly to Theseus, to the father. And she says, "Hear, Theseus, all the story of thy grief. Verily I bring but anguish, not relief. Yet 'twas for this I came, to show how high and clean was thy son's heart, that he may die honored of men. Aye, and to tell no less the frenzy, or in some sort the nobleness of thy dead wife." Right? In other words, Artemis says, I want you to understand that both parties involved in this, both Hippolytus as well as Phaedra, deserve some pity. Right? One spirit there is, whom we that know the joy of white virginity most hate in heaven, speaking obviously of Aphrodite, she sent her fire to run in Phaedrus' veins, so that she loved thy son. Yet strove she long with love, and in the stress fell not, till by her nurse's craftiness betrayed, who stole with oaths of secrecy to entreat thy son. And he, most righteously, nor did her will, nor when thy railing scorn beat on him, broke the oath that he had sworn for God's sake. And thy Phaedra, panic-eyed, wrote a false writ, and slew thy son, and died, lying, but thou wast nimble to believe. In other words, you jumped too quickly, right, to believe the note that was left by Phaedra. Theseus, of course, is ruined, very much like Creon at the conclusion of the play Antigone, right? The son is brought in to have some last words, first with Artemis. Artemis will say, the cursed Aphrodite caught Phaedra in her mesh, in her net. We think about Clytemnestra as using that net to catch Agamemnon. You have the same kind of symbolism going on here, right? Hippolytus says, Aphrodite? Yeah, I see it. I see it. Now I understand. And Artemis says, she missed her worship, loathed thy chastity. In other words, she says, she hated the fact that you said you would never ever sleep with a woman, never experience love. Aphrodite saw that as an insult, and so she decided that she would go ahead and jack you both, right? Well, the son, after this one, the son is going to forgive the father. Theseus will say, "A lying spirit hath made blind my eyes," sounding very much like Oedipus at that point, right? And Theseus realizes that he's ruined. Hippolytus and Theseus will exchange their forgivenesses. The last words of Hippolytus, and Theseus, "Dear son," Theseus will say, "Now I see thy nobleness." And Hippolytus will say at the very end his last words, "Lo, I have borne my burden. This is death. Quick, father, lay the mantle on my face." And then Theseus will finally say about Aphrodite, "Long shall I remember thee." And Theseus goes on to live a really wretched life for the conclusion of his life. He ends up being killed in the court of a king. You can go back and look at my Hamilton's mythology lecture to kind of get the full story on the great Theseus. And that's the end of our play. Well, let's talk level 2A really quickly in messages, themes. One obvious message here is the power of love and the power of passion. And, of course, the notion that when we feel strongly about the way we are and we take pride in that, that can also sometimes be kind of a weakness, right? Of course, the spurned lover motif comes to mind. We've already mentioned the story of Joseph from the Judeo-Christian Bible, the book of Genesis, chapter 39. The idea that sometimes a poor young guy is going to be ruined because he does not approve of the advances of a woman, right? Of course, there's a third message here about, for fathers to be careful what they vow. Theseus asks Poseidon, "Will you kill my son?" And of course, exactly that's what happens. We think about rash judgments. We think about the words of a father. We think about, for example, Creon talking to Haemon. We think about the father of Juliet talking to Juliet at the end of Romeo and Juliet, don't we, right? And of course, we have to say this, for Greek audiences, the message is clear. You better pay proper reverence to all the gods, or you may end up getting jacked, right? At level 2B, our rhetoric, the symbolism here, as we said, we would look at, well, of course, Hippolytus is going to kind of symbolize a certain kind of pride in his chastity and his religious observances, which can kind of lead to danger, right? Phaedra, of course, is going to represent that lost in love. I mean, it's understandable. She is going sick and soon to die because she's so in love with her stepson, Hippolytus, and there's nothing she can do about that. Of course, the nurse, that go-between, Pindar is in fact referenced in this, right? That go-between who tries to set it up and make everything right. You'll remember in Romeo and Juliet that the nurse in fact will say later in the play to Juliet, why don't you just pretend like you never got married to Romeo and go ahead and marry Paris? Do you remember that? The nurse, in borrowing from that, is here, trying to make everything work out, but always out of good intentions. The nurse in this play loves Phaedra, of course, raised her. The conflict of our play, of course, is a tough one. Discipline versus lust, Hippolytus versus Phaedra, Artemis versus Aphrodite. Artemis, who of course is just interested in the hunt and that kind of thing, going off on your own in the woods and running and hunting and that kind of thing, versus Aphrodite, who's very much about guys and girls finding each other and the hooking up and all of that, love and all of those kinds of things. Those tensions are, of course, central to this. And then, of course, fathers and sons, no question, right? No question. At level 3A, well, we've already mentioned a number of texts. Creon with Haemon and Antigone comes to mind. Juliet's father and Romeo and Juliet comes to mind. We've mentioned the Genesis 39 passage with Joseph and Potiphar's wife. You can think about other kinds of examples here. What is for you the text where you have a certain kind of woman bashing going on, like what we found in that Hippolytus passage? Some of you will immediately think of Shakespeare's Taming of the Shrew, or of course the lines I quoted from Hamlet, frailty, thy name is woman. The question has often been asked, where did Shakespeare get such a low view of women? I mean, Goneril and Regan and King Lear and on it goes. Like, what is going on with that kind of idea that women can be such nasty beasts? I think some of it probably did come from Shakespeare's study of the Greek writers, and especially, of course, from Euripides. Okay, how are we going to relate this to ourselves? Well, let me ask this question to start with. Out of a play like this, who do you pity most? Do you pity Hippolytus? Because, I mean, here's a kid, he's done nothing wrong. I mean, he said, I got no interest in women, I'm interested in going out and hunting, and by the end of the play, he's dead, and his father thinks that he slept with his stepmom and all of that. Do you pity most Phaedra? Phaedra is, I mean, she's caught in that mesh, as we were talking about before. She's caught. She doesn't know what's the best way to respond. She confides to her friend, right? And in that case, her friend tries to be the go-between, and it doesn't work out. Maybe it is the nurse that you most pity, because you've maybe been in a situation where you were like trying to help resolve a situation that had to do with love. And of course, love is a powerful passion, right? And you were the one trying to be the go-between, and in the end, you kind of ended up messing everything up, but it really wasn't your fault. How about this one? A time that you feel like you were probably punished or not believed for something that you absolutely did not do. Being accused of something you did not do, the way Hippolytus is accused of sleeping with his stepmother, and he didn't do it at all. What did you do in a moment like that? How did you try to defend yourself? Hippolytus calls on time and says, time will prove that I am right and that you are wrong. Of course, finally, to think about poor Phaedra, what was a time that you were controlled, powerfully controlled by love and the passion of love and the desire for love, and how did that one work out? For you, or maybe against you, as this play suggests. Well, that's our introduction to Euripides, but we don't finish there. We actually will finish in our next lecture with the Bacchae. Some call this the greatest Greek play. Some call this the play that ended all Greek drama. Many have thought that this was the last play Euripides ever wrote, and many have thought that this is the greatest play about plays. So come on back and we'll do the Bacchae next. Thank you.